Rookie-on-rookie crime right there in Mule's face.
Did one prediction expose a bigger problem inside the 1BA? A single All-WNBA projection from USA Today has ignited a firestorm, placing Paige Bueckers on the first team while Caitlin Clark landed on the second. With Clark ranking near the top of the league in scoring and assists, fans are asking one question: what are voters really rewarding? Performance, efficiency, or narrative? As the debate grows louder online, the numbers tell a more complicated story than the headlines suggest. Was Clark truly overlooked, or does Bueckers deserve the top spot? This breakdown compares both stat lines and finds the answer. The prediction that sparked debate. On July 30th, 2026, USA Today Sports published its projected All-WNBA teams for the season. A predictive exercise the outlet runs each year ahead of the league's official postseason honors. The selections placed Dallas Wings guard Paige Bueckers on the first team, while Indiana Fever guard Caitlin Clark was projected for the second team. The list covered the full slate of award projections, but it was the Clark-Bueckers split that generated the most immediate attention.
Paige Bueckers, who had the fifth highest scoring rookie season, as Clark gets by Bueckers and gets to the rim.
The prediction landed at a specific moment in the season, after the All-Star break. With 16 regular season games still remaining, and with both the Fever and the Wings sitting at 18 wins and 10 losses, tied for position in a tightly bunched Eastern and Western landscape, Dallas held the tiebreaker between the two franchises, courtesy of a season-opening victory over Indiana back in May. Reaction moved quickly once the prediction circulated. Fans across social media raised questions about the reasoning behind placing Clark on the second tier, despite her ranking among the league's statistical leaders in multiple categories, with many pointing to what they characterized as a season-long pattern of coverage they felt had been unfavorable toward her specifically. Some observers noted that predictive lists like this one are inherently subjective, built on a mix of team success, statistical output, and voter perception rather than a single hard formula, which is exactly what made the specific placement worth examining rather than simply reacting to. That reaction didn't happen in isolation. The prediction landed in the middle of a broader stretch of coverage debates that had already followed Clark for much of July. Days earlier, a separate USA Today post claiming Clark had skipped the Belize May's All-Star Orange Carpet event to get her hair done was quickly corrected after it turned out she had instead been hosting a charity event for her own foundation.
Clark visited McCombs Middle School this afternoon to help give away back-to-school supplies to students.
An error the outlet acknowledged, though only after significant public pushback. Around the same stretch, national commentators had also been publicly debating how much attention Clark's off-court coverage was drawing relative to her on-court production, with some arguing the two conversations had become difficult to fully separate. None of that context proves anything about the specific reasoning behind the All-WNBA prediction. Correlation between a string of coverage disputes and one specific statistical projection is not the same as causation, but it does explain why the reaction to this particular list moved as fast and as intensely as it did. Fans weren't just reacting to one prediction in isolation. They were reacting to what felt, to them, like the latest entry in a longer pattern. It's worth understanding what a predictive list like this one actually represents before evaluating whether it got the call right. Unlike the official All-WNBA teams, which are determined by a panel of media voters after the regular season concludes using the complete body of work, outlets like USA Today publish these predictions as an editorial exercise, an informed guess made with weeks of the season still unplayed. That distinction doesn't make the prediction meaningless, but it does mean the list reflects one writer's or one desk's read on the season up to that point, not a verdict handed down by the league or its accredited voting panel. The stakes attached to the eventual official version of these teams are real. All-WNBA selection has historically factored into certain performance-based provisions written into player contracts across the league, on top of the more obvious legacy and marketing value that comes with first-team recognition specifically. Is a predictive award list actually meant to reflect who is playing the best basketball, or is it shaped by something less quantifiable? Media narrative, name recognition, or a sense of team storyline? That question sits underneath almost every debate like this one, and it's worth holding on to as the numbers get laid out, because the answer isn't always as simple as looking at a box score. What makes this particular case worth dissecting isn't the existence of a close call. Award races are close calls by definition. It's the size of the statistical gap being described as a close call, and whether that gap actually holds up once every relevant number is placed side by side, rather than summarized in a single ranking. Clark's strongest argument. Caitlin Clark entered the back half of the 2026 season averaging 21.5 points, 7 9/10 assists.
For the reasoning behind her assists, which have been in the double-digit range here for 4 straight. Clark bouncing.
And 3 8/10 rebounds per game across 24 appearances. A scoring and playmaking combination that placed her second in the league in both total points and total assists at the time of the prediction. This wasn't simply Clark producing volume without efficiency. Her shooting percentages told a complementary story. She was connecting on 44 3/10% of her field goal attempts and 35 4/10% from three-point range, both figures representing career highs across her 3 professional seasons. The context around those numbers matters as much as the numbers themselves. Clark helped guide the Fever to the 5th best record in the league at the time of the prediction, a marked step forward for a franchise that had spent the better part of a decade near the bottom of the standings before her arrival. Her 3rd consecutive All-Star selection that July reflected not just name recognition, but a body of on-court work that peers, coaches, and voters had already weighed in on once that season. That body of work extended beyond the All-Star selection itself. Earlier in the season, Clark had already been named the Eastern Conference Player of the Week for a 2nd time.
Here's Clark. Hits from distance.
A recognition determined week to week by the league office based purely on that stretch's on-court production, rather than any broader narrative. 2 such honors in a single season is not a routine achievement, and it reflects a level of sustained, week-over-week production that a single season-long averages line can sometimes understate, since it means Clark wasn't simply compiling numbers over slow stretches, padded by a handful of standout nights. She was producing at an elite level, consistently enough to be recognized twice within the same season by evaluators looking only at short-term performance. Clark's on-court value that season also extended into areas a simple scoring and assist line doesn't fully capture. She remained one of the league's most heavily defended players on a possession-by-possession basis, regularly facing box-and-one looks, double teams off ball screens, and defensive schemes built specifically around limiting her touches, the kind of attention usually reserved for a small handful of the league's most dangerous offensive threats. Producing career-high efficiency numbers while facing that level of defensive attention is, in most statistical frameworks, treated as a meaningful indicator of skill growth rather than simply a product of favorable matchups. It also means her raw numbers likely understate her value relative to a player facing a more conventional distribution of defensive coverage across a season. Clark's performance immediately after the All-Star break added further weight to her case at exactly the moment the prediction was published. In a road victory over the Seattle Storm days, before the USA Today list went live, she recorded 32 points, 7 rebounds, and 5 assists, shooting efficiently from the field.
The vision from Clark, she's got 5 assists in just over 5 minutes.
And from beyond the arc, in a performance that read less like a return from the break and more like a continuation of her season-long form. Clark's impact in close games added another dimension to her case that season-long averages alone tend to smooth over. Several of the Fever's wins during that stretch of the season came down to the final minutes, with Clark directly involved in the possessions that decided them, whether by scoring, drawing defensive attention that freed up a teammate, or simply controlling tempo when the Fever needed to protect a lead. Late-game performance is notoriously difficult to isolate cleanly in a box score, since it often shows up as a single-made shot or a single assist buried among 40 minutes of other statistics, but it's exactly the kind of production that tends to shape how teammates, coaches, and opposing scouting reports talk about a player, even when it doesn't show up as its own separate category on a predictive list. How does a player rank second in the league in two major statistical categories and still land outside the top tier of season-end projections? That's not a rhetorical dead end. It's the exact tension this comparison needs to sit with, because the answer isn't found in Clark's numbers alone. It's found in what the other side of the argument actually looks like. And that side deserves the same level of scrutiny rather than a dismissive glance. The case for Bueckers. Any honest comparison has to start from an honest premise. Paige Bueckers was having an outstanding season in her own right.
Your roster, Bueckers, penetrating, that's her kind of shot.
And the case for her first-team selection wasn't built on thin air. Through the same point in the season, the Dallas Wings guard was averaging 20 and 7/10 points, 6 and 2/10 assists, and 4 and 2/10 rebounds per game across 26 appearances. A full 2 games more than Clark had played. A detail worth noting, given how injury absences had shaped Clark's early season workload in prior years. Bueckers' season also carried its own broader context worth acknowledging. She had entered the league as one of the most decorated collegiate players in recent memory, and the Wings franchise itself had spent recent seasons rebuilding from the bottom of the standings, not unlike the Fever's own trajectory before Clark's arrival. A guard producing at this level, while helping lift a previously struggling franchise into playoff contention, is by definition doing exactly what first-team caliber players are typically recognized for doing: elevating a roster's ceiling rather than simply padding a stat line on a team that would have won regardless. There's also a simpler, more direct way to state the case for Bueckers that doesn't require any statistical modeling at all. She was doing this as a second-year player transitioning into a larger offensive role, following a rookie season that had already established her as one of the league's most well-regarded young guards.
Paige Bueckers joins Caitlin Clark as the second rookie in WNBA history to record 500 or more points.
Improvement of this magnitude from one season to the next is not guaranteed for any player, regardless of college pedigree. The fact that her efficiency numbers climbed rather than dipped while her offensive role expanded is itself a data point in her favor. It suggests a player who was absorbing a heavier workload without the typical efficiency cost that often comes with that kind of year-over-year jump in responsibility. The Wings' overall trajectory that season reinforced Bueckers' case in a way that ran parallel to Clark's own franchise turnaround. A team that had spent recent years near the bottom of the standings was, by mid-season, playing meaningful games with real playoff stakes attached to them, and Bueckers had been the most consistent common thread across that improvement. Evaluators who give real weight to a player's role in a team's year-over-year turnaround, rather than looking exclusively at individual counting stats in isolation, would reasonably view that context as strengthening rather than complicating her case for first-team recognition. Where Bueckers separated herself most clearly was efficiency. She was shooting 51 and 4/10% from the field and 38 and 8/10% from three-point range, both figures representing career bests, and both meaningfully higher than Clark's marks in the same categories. In a league increasingly focused on shooting efficiency as a marker of offensive value, that gap is not a minor footnote. It's a legitimate, defensible piece of the case in her favor. Advanced efficiency measures that account for the added value of three-point makes and free throw trips, metrics increasingly cited across basketball analytics circles even when not explicitly published alongside a predictive list, would likely widen that efficiency gap further in Bueckers' favor, simply because her shooting splits translate to more points produced per shot attempt
Paige Bueckers just turns the corner, shoots the midi
than a lower percentage, higher volume profile does. Bueckers also helped drive the Wings to the same 18-10 record posted by Indiana, and Dallas held the season series tiebreaker after an opening night victory over the Fever back in May, a 107-104 decision that, however early in the season, still counts on the ledger. For voters who weigh team accomplishment alongside individual statistics, that head-to-head result and the shared win total give Bueckers a foothold that pure scoring or assist totals don't fully capture. It would be easy, in a piece built around questioning a snub, to minimize Bueckers' season to make the argument cleaner. That would also be inaccurate, She was, by nearly every meaningful measure, one of the best guards in the league in 2026. And any fair breakdown of this prediction has to hold both things at once: that Clark's case is statistically strong and that Bueckers' case is not manufactured. The numbers tell a different story. Placed side by side, the two stat lines tell a more layered story than either snub or clear choice fully captures. Clark led in raw scoring by roughly 0.8 of a point per game and in assists by a full 1 7/10. Meaningful advantages in the two most heavily weighted categories for a lead guard. Bueckers led in field goal percentage by roughly 7 points and in three-point percentage by just over 3. Also meaningful, in an era where efficiency increasingly shapes how analysts assess offensive value, neither set of numbers cancels the other out cleanly. A guard producing more points and assists, even at lower efficiency,
Indiana. It's the season opener for the Indiana Fever and the Dallas Wings. Gainbridge Fieldhouse
is generating more total offensive value in most possession-based models. But a guard shooting at a notably higher clip is doing more with fewer possessions, a form of value that doesn't always show up in a box score at first glance. This is closer to a coin flip than either side's most vocal supporters tend to admit. There's also a role-based dimension raw numbers don't fully surface. Clark's assist totals reflect primary playmaking responsibility, initiating offense possession after possession. That differs from a scoring guard with more shot creation support around her. Bueckers, a capable playmaker herself, operated within a structure that distributed creation somewhat differently. Neither approach is objectively superior. Compressing both into two tiers flattens that nuance. Defensive workload adds a layer list built on offensive averages underweights.
Bueckers giving it up. Sims will try again and hit.
Both guards regularly defended the opposing team's primary ball handler on top of a heavy offensive role, a cost a complete accounting of either player's value would need to include. What tips the scale then? Team record was effectively even, 18-10 for both, removing that as a differentiator beyond Dallas's early tiebreaker. Volume favored Clark. Efficiency favored Bueckers. Games played favored Bueckers by 2. When a comparison splits this evenly, the deciding factor often comes down to something the numbers can't explain: voter preference, or simply which storyline felt more compelling to whoever compiled the list. A voter drawn to scoring lands on Clark almost immediately. A voter drawn to efficiency lands on Bueckers just as fast. Neither instinct is wrong, but it means two reasonable evaluators working from the same numbers could reach opposite conclusions depending on which statistic they weighted first. That's an unusual place for an award debate to sit, and exactly why this case has generated more discussion than a typical snub story does.
And then knocking it down, perfect.
Shepard with a nice catch. Big free agent pickup from Minnesota.
Does that expose the subjectivity that fuels frustration when a close race gets presented as settled? The numbers don't support calling this lopsided either direction. They support calling it one of the closest calls of the season, a different story than snub headlines or dismissals of Bueckers' case tend to tell. Predictions compressing a season into two tiers before it ends have generated this pushback before, and likely will again. Neither guard addressed the prediction publicly, which fits a familiar pattern, letting the remaining games talk rather than litigating a projection in real time. That leaves the two August meetings carrying even more weight than they otherwise would. The real verdict awaits. Predictions published in late July are, by definition, incomplete pictures. 16 regular season games remained on the schedule at the time USA Today's list went live, and the two teams at the center of this comparison were scheduled to meet twice more before the season concluded. First in Indiana on August 14th, then in Dallas on August 20th.
She's throwing it to the best playmaker on the floor.
Those two games carry outsized weight, not just for playoff seeding between two teams tied in the standings, but for the ongoing statistical case each guard is building in real time. Beyond the two head-to-head meetings themselves, both teams still had a mix of matchups remaining against playoff-caliber opponents and rebuilding franchises alike, the kind of schedule variance that tends to even out over a full season, but can still meaningfully shift a player's cumulative shooting percentages or per-game averages, depending on which stretch of games happens to fall in a hot or cold shooting spell. Voters compiling the actual All-WNBA ballots after the season don't have the luxury or the excuse of reacting to a single mid-season snapshot the way a July prediction inevitably does. They'll be working from the complete, finished record, games in Dallas and Indiana included, along with whatever the rest of the schedule adds to both resumes between now and the final horn of the regular season. A strong individual showing in either or both of those meetings could shift the underlying numbers meaningfully by season's end, closing Bueckers' efficiency gap, extending Clark's volume advantage.
Caitlin Clark's got the ball over to Bueckers. Bueckers sets up the three, and it's nothing. So far in this one, you would never believe this is her first time with the senior team.
Or simply providing more head-to-head evidence for voters who weigh direct matchups heavily when comparing two players occupying similar positional value. It's also worth remembering that predictive lists like this one are not the actual All-WNBA voting. That process happens after the regular season concludes, conducted by a separate panel using the full body of work, rather than a snapshot taken in late July. There's a broader stakes conversation attached to this specific race, too, beyond the two players directly involved. Both the Fever and the Wings had emerged as two of the league's most closely watched franchises for reasons well beyond win totals. National broadcast slots, merchandise sales, and overall audience growth had followed both rosters throughout the season, meaning the two remaining head-to-head matchups were already circled on network schedules, independent of any award implications. That level of attention means neither guard's remaining performances will go unnoticed or undercovered heading into the stretch run, for whatever that's worth to voters weighing recency and visibility alongside raw statistical output. That distinction matters more than it might seem. A prediction published with 16 games left to play is, functionally, a projection built on incomplete data, an educated guess rather than a final verdict. The players themselves still have a direct hand in how this resolves, in a way that neither outlet's projection nor any amount of statistical debate before the fact can fully account for.
Paige Bueckers, who dumps it off to Monique Billings for two, and USA crosses the 100-point mark.
Both Indiana and Dallas still had a mix of matchups remaining against upper-tier and lower-tier opponents alike, meaning the final stat lines for both guards were likely to shift, however modestly, before the actual voting panel ever convened. What the numbers currently show is a genuinely close race between two guards playing at an extremely high level, with real statistical arguments on both sides and a shared record that offers no clean tiebreaker beyond one early season result. Where that race lands by the time actual voting occurs will depend less on July headlines and more on what happens across the final stretch of the schedule, starting with two games that could end up mattering a great deal more than a predictive list published in late July. Clark leads in scoring and assists. Bueckers leads in shooting efficiency. Both teams sit at 18 and 10, with only one early tiebreaker separating them. That is not a snub, and it is not a clear-cut choice. It is one of the closest statistical races of the season, flattened into two tiers by a prediction published with 16 games still left to play. The real answer will not come from a July headline. It comes from two head-to-head matchups in August, and everything both guards do before the final horn. If you think the numbers point somewhere different, say so in the comments. Like this video and subscribe for more.